Okay, I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Julie Shields-Rutina, and I am the Director of College Planning, Education, and Training at MEFA. And this is going to be a terrific webinar today called Getting First Generation Students to the End, or as our experts had it, which sounds a little better, Getting First Gen to the End. So let me just give you a few logistics here, and then I will introduce our wonderful speakers. All right, so here's how this will work today. You're going to hear from Jerome Tucker and Natalie Wong, and they'll have a lot to share. We've talked a lot on this topic, and they're terrific. So if you have questions, they welcome them. They want this to be a conversation. So put your questions in the Q&A section, and I will bring those up with Jerome and Natalie as you go along. If you need closed captioning, you can press the live transcript button, and you will see the words we speak across the screen. If you need to leave, which you won't, you can do that at any time. And then tomorrow, I will send a link to the recording and to the slides. So we are recording this. And I think that's all for logistics. Let me just tell you a little bit about MEFA. If you don't know MEFA, MEFA is a state authority created in 1982 to help families plan, save, and pay for college. And we have the state's college savings plans. We have low-cost loans for families. And then everything else we do is about helping students and helping families in whatever stage they are in this college process. So because of that, we also work a lot with school counselors, and we work a ton with colleges. And we have a lot of trainings and webinars. And so continue to visit our website. And if you have education and training that you would be interested in me for providing, let me know that as well, because we just love to collaborate on all of these topics. So with that, I am going to turn it over to, as I mentioned, Jerome and Natalie. I'm going to let them talk more about themselves and introduce a little more about themselves to you, and we'll go with that. Now I am going to stop sharing, and let's see, make sure you can do that, Jerome.
Okay.
Good.
Just making sure, is the presentation showing?
It is. It looks
Okay,
great.
All right. Well, thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for signing up for today. I'm happy to do this webinar along with Natalie. My name is Jerome Tucker. I'm currently the Assistant Director of Financial Aid for Student Employment here at Harvard University, but I have over 12 years of higher ed experience, both at Borough Manhattan Community College in New York City, before also coming to Northeastern University, serving as a financial aid counselor here. I am a former first generation student, so this is one of those particular topics that means so much to me. So I'm happy to be able to share information on how to support students like me in the future.
Hi, and my name is Natalie Wong. I am an Assistant Director of Financial Aid at Salve Regina University in Newport, Rhode Island. And I am also a first generation college student. So I was so happy to be able to join Jerome today in doing this presentation with him. I have been in financial aid for about 5 years, and I'm really excited to talk more about this today.
So getting started for today's presentation, we're going to establish a few things here with the agenda. So we're going to define what is a first generation college student, discuss the variance that exists within the population, the issues some of the students face before and after acceptance, the hurdles they may encounter during their journey to graduation, and how we can support first gen to ensure they are armed with the tools to survive and thrive. So starting off with defining the first generation student, by definition, a first gen student is born to parents who have not graduated college, which means that the student whose parent attended college for 3 years, for example, but did not graduate, be considered a first-gen student. In putting together this presentation, one of the most revealing things learned in preparation was there was not a lot of data collection on first-gen students at individual colleges and universities. Sometimes it was extremely hard to come to a general cause and effect based on the data that exists out there. And I'm hopeful that these changes over the years towards many of the schools that have implemented a lot of these first generation student support programs will continue to increase the degree completion percentage. So therefore, we ensure that more students are successful going forward. Now let's get into the details about the population and who occupies the first generation student space so we can have a bit more of a stronger focus on how we might serve these different populations within the first gen community. So I have classified the first generation student group into 4 different groups, which kind of determines the level and which type of assistance might be needed for them. So here in student group 1, you see there are parents who have no college experience at all. Parents may be documented immigrants, but no US college experience, and the student has not been a part of a college readiness program of sorts. That particular group are coming in with kind of bare bones knowledge. All the information that they might have had could have been just from online formats. So no, not necessarily a structured approach in the information that they receive. Student group 2 is parents who might have went to college but did not graduate, the student who might have a family member outside of their immediate household that attended or graduated from a US college, or the student could have participated in some college prep program. So one of the things that I like to say is that student group 1 and student group 2, the information will kind of be consistent. Even though student group 2 is in a better position where they might already have some offhand knowledge, the way that you would communicate with those student groups in particular, it would kind of be the same information that you would relay. There's no, I say it's not really too much additional nuance that exists between the 2 groups. While student group 3, which is eligible non-citizens, as well as parents who may be undocumented immigrants, dependency overrides, which is just essentially students who are technically considered dependents, but actually their life circumstances mean that dictate that they are actually an independent student. The students is also an orphan. There's also students who may be refugees, student granted asylum, Cuban Haitian immigrant, conditional entry, and the orphan ward of the court are specific groups. And I classify them as their own group because the general requirements for them to receive things like federal aid is not necessarily as black and white for student group 1 and student group 2. So for student group 3, sometimes your information and the way that you give it will kind of have to be a little bit more layered in order to make sure that that student is in position to succeed, or at least understand what their financial aid award can look like and what steps they need to take to ensure that they have those funds. In student group 4, students is DACA, as well as international students. This group in particular, they don't typically qualify for federal aid, but institutionally, there's a lot of help or support that you may have to provide. So the conversation with student group 4 is drastically different than the first 3 student groups. Natalie, anything you want to add on this particular one?
No, I think we do a great job of summarizing the different types of first generation students.
So now we want to identify the issues at hand. While there may be many contributing factors for students, some of the main reasons for first generation students to leave without a degree can be classified in the following. So financial burdens, many have taken out large student loans to pay for school, and some have a job throughout their college career. After all, it's not just tuition that they have to worry about. You have things such as textbooks, housing, bills, food, laptop, and in some cases, some of them have kids or family to care for. And sometimes it can be really difficult to navigate a new environment while working and trying to keep up your academics. It's not uncommon for lower income first generation students to drop out because the cost can sometimes just be too great. And if they drop out, they end up with additional financial burdens, saddled with heavy debt and no benefit. low income first generation students have a greater risk when it comes to failure due to some of these financial burdens. Affordability is always one of the main things that we talk about, and affordability at each institution that a student may be attending looks different at each location. So a part of the process is you want to make sure that those students always have the information broken down into words that they can understand, and kind of understand things to a more surface level so they can know what they can expect. We also talk about dependency, like these are 9 times out of 10, these students are dependents. And so there's a certain level of dependence that they have from their family, or they're looking for some type of handhold because this is their first time navigating this process. So, some things might be unclear and their desires can get them a little ahead of themselves. And so we want to make sure that the financial burdens are identified, so therefore we can know how to best serve these students. And one of the next things I like to talk about is the lack of support. So first generation students don't usually have a parent or family member to help them navigate the college system. So this puts them at a disadvantage before they even begin applying to college, which can increasingly involve in the competitive process in of itself. And not everyone has the ability to have, a system of school counselors who can help. First generation students are often left on their own sometimes to research schools and fields of study, fill out applications, apply for financial aid, secure housing, and register for classes. And sometimes that can be overwhelming for students as they try to navigate those processes for the first time. Inequitable access to resources. Many students aren't aware of the resources as others. I know for me personally, when I first got into college, I didn't know that I could just like make my schedule to my liking. And I didn't know that there were like academic advisors that would help me plan out. I just kind of was using the website. And so sometimes if you don't have some of that information available to students, they don't necessarily know where to look. And so sometimes that can create a barrier. And when you look at certain things as far as like, these students are all coming from different school systems across the world, especially our national university, where you have a large population coming from different states and sometimes different countries. They're coming from a different upbringing. So sometimes, there's just a certain level of access that exists in some areas that it doesn't exist in others. And one of the favorite things to say is life. Life is always a major impact on students because it can come at you fast, and personalities, personal and family history impacts the way everyone is able to handle hurdles that may come their way. Natalie, anything you want to add on that one?
No, I think you really summarized well the different issues at hand when working with the population. Okay, so something to think about is this is a graph from the Trellis Company Financial Wellness Survey that they did, and it's showing populations that are vulnerable to being extremely worried about paying for college, but also, like Jerome said, life. And as you can see here, first generation students are strongly agreeing that they're consistently stressed out about the financial piece of college. As you can see, 70% versus 60% of non-first generational students, and then 57% are stressed also about paying for life itself, versus 45% not for first generation. And like Jerome mentioned, a lot of this comes from, the pre-preparation they have before starting the college experience. I know personally, even though I was not from a low income area, my parents had never been to college. So we were very flustered by the whole kind of process. And there wasn't really a lot of help for me because everyone just assumed that I knew what I was doing. So later on in this presentation, we talk about how you can reach all your populations because you never know who is a first gen.
And so kind of pigging back to the issues at hand, just so therefore there's a little bit more context into what drove this research. So as you can see, there's a large percentage of low income and first generation college students that kind of fare the worst in terms of loan repayment. So as an academic institution, there is a certain expected level of responsibility that you have when it comes to students and their ability to pay for school. So one of the things I'll point out is that a school can lose federal loan eligibility if they have a student loan default rate of over 30% for a 3-year period. So as you can see, with a default rate of low income first generation students being at 46%, as well as low income not first generation being at 39%, this is a figure, as even though it's from a little bit earlier in the times and everything being on pause right now as far as student loan repayments, these are some things that have naturally impacted, and it can have, a longstanding impact. So we want to try to do as much as we can in the financial aid office to try to make sure that students are armed with the right information to kind of prevent some of these things that can occur, which leaves students for the inability to receive federal aid going forward if they do want to kind of continue pursuing that degree that they may not have been able to achieve at the time. And here I just wanted to highlight some of the data that relates to default rates, which, I can go through all of them, but I just wanted to make sure that this information was present for everyone to look at, especially on the slide deck that you all will receive. So therefore, you do have some of that information to kind of see a bigger picture that exists here. Now we will discuss some of the hurdles that the students will face before acceptance as well as after acceptance. All right, so some of the financial hurdles that exist just in the process before the acceptance: application fees. There's always there's the fee waiver process that exists at a lot of schools, but again, first generation students might not know that, so they'll see that there's an application fee for a particular school that they're interested in, and they'll see that and just kind of automatically write themselves off. So things like that, I always say to make sure that on the application fee, on the application process yourself, there's already information on there in particular that specify, like, if you are unable to afford this fee, like, we do have a fee waiver process, for example, because that could be the difference between a student just writing your school off for attending or feeling comfortable enough to apply. Deposit deadlines, there's schools typically have them as far as they're trying to make sure that they have their admitted class. And so therefore, there's usually deadlines that students now have to also deal with before they can even pick the school that they want to choose to attend. The aid process literacy that's there between the FAFSA as well as the CSS profile, there's a lot of information that is required. And that process itself is very lengthy and very heavy. And, that can be overwhelming to students, especially if you're a student of first gen where the parent has never even gone through that process to be able to help their child identify that. One of the things that I always found to be interesting in some cases where the parents are still, for some of the older generation, they're still kind of like not trusting of technology. So like putting their financial information onto a computer is not something that everyone just feels comfortable at doing. So, that process in itself is also kind of a battle that they have to withstand, or like just not understanding what certain information is. And while the FAFSA and CSS profile now has a lot of help boxes as far as being able to identify fields, it's at times with how much information is being requested, that can be a lot for them to cover. And I've already, the application fees and fee waivers are tied right hand in hand. And the personal hurdles of selecting the right school, there are times where, students don't even know what they want to go to school for. They know that they have to go to college, but they don't necessarily know what they're going to go to college for. And so you want to make sure they're selecting the right school to actually achieve that, but also in not knowing maybe where their degree progress is going to be. They also want to make sure that they don't put themselves behind the 8 ball, because one of the biggest things is, the financial aid that you do receive, there is a time limit on it as far as how much you can use and, towards your degree program. So, it's a very important step for them in selecting the right school that actually fits their academic needs as well as their financial needs. Competing responsibilities is always going to go back to some students are actually working positions in addition to going to school. You know, there's a school day and there's requirements for classwork and homework. And, you know, you have all the things. You also have students who may be in extracurricular activities. And so, you know, corralling all those responsibilities while also going through the application process and hurdles, like, there's a lot of things that can impact the timing of these students being able to achieve things when you add in the fact that there's an aid process literacy that might not be there, and then also an application process literacy that might not be there. And so there's always going to be competing responsibilities that could potentially impact the student's ability to get certain things done in a timely manner. And parental approval, that's one of a major thing. These students are dependents, a majority of them. And the families that we are serving, like, they also have to feel comfortable with paying a certain amount for school and feeling like there's the right financial aid package. So a student may want to go to this one particular school really bad, but the parents are saying, well, we can't afford that one. Can you look at this one? And, you know, so they're also sometimes having that back and forth between their parents and having to make those decisions as well. And my final thing on this in particular is the application guidelines and acronyms, the requirements for what is needed for the student to submit the application, and acronyms. Like, we are in aid world acronym heavy. And sometimes in general, those things, I feel like we can kind of get used to being an acronym language because this is just what we do each year. So understanding that there's always the need to give context to the acronym and making sure the information and related to the acronym is kind of using the original language and kind of walking students through, like, the acronym jungle, I like to call it. So therefore you actually know what each acronym stands for. So therefore your aid process and your financial aid process, your application process is as smooth as possible. Anything you want to add on this one, Natalie? Oh, Julie.
Well,
No, I'm good.
And there are a couple of questions, so I might
Oh.
pose a couple of those to you, if that's good.
Yeah.
So one person asked, just for her own clarification, are students who have parents that graduated outside of the United States still considered first gen?
Yes. Well, no. They would not. They would. I'm honestly gonna say I don't necessarily have a full answer for that, but I can say that the similarities that exist, like, there are certain things that we are aware of in, like, the process in which we do, but sometimes those same things don't trickle over into the States for the United States colleges the same way they do for international. So in the case where you might have a student who has graduated from an international university, they theoretically would not be considered first gen. But in the situation where, as far as the information that might be needed, it still might be required that you be a little bit more thorough in the explanation of, like, these are the requirements, because the parents don't necessarily have the information related to what the US aid process could look like.
Yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I laughed because I feel like in financial aid, we always say it depends. And that was kind of that, it's gray, right? But another question, and you two might have some answers, but maybe others attending will have some answers too. So I'd encourage you to put that information into the Q&A too. And the question is, what are schools doing to help with the deposit deadline? You know, if that becomes an issue. And I don't know if you might cover it, but yeah.
I'm assuming they're referencing the May 1st deadline is going to be how I'm going to interpret this question when answering. So for us personally, if there is a family who, you know, really wants to attend our institution, but maybe struggling to make that May 1st deadline, we just say, have that conversation and be transparent with us. We'll be as transparent with you as you are with us. there are certain cases that we are able to make exceptions. You never know. That's why I always encourage people to ask. And I feel like sometimes people don't. And there are other cases where you are going to have that tough conversation with that family saying, unfortunately, this is our deadline. If things change, we will always reach out and notify. But I definitely think that's dependent on the institution and kind of the situation that institution is in.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you, Natalie. Great. And if others, have any thoughts about what you do at your own institution, share it and I can share it out too. Okay, thanks.
So here we'll talk about some of the academic and financial hurdles that happens after acceptance. And these particular ones are things that I have a lot of experience in handling in the financial aid office in particular. R2T4s, which is just return to Title IV calculation. So again, the acronym jungle, being able to outline what that acronym stands for. It's one of the biggest pain points for financial aid admin and the students, because these calculations could be the sole reason a low-income student who is unable to finish your degree with your institution. There's always this nice soft landing where if the student had to leave, that they wouldn't suffer from an R2T4 calculation. Is not something that we ever want to promote, because we never want to, enhance the it's okay if you just leave after this particular point in time. But the key concept here is to always just have that conversation, have language related to R2T4s available to students when students are asking about dropping, which we will go into in the next slide. So I won't go too deep into it right now, but those are one of the biggest pain points, and we see a lot of that can potentially derail, especially when you have a situation where a student has already been given a refund and then they drop their classes, and now there's this deficit that they now owe to the university, which then causes issue for registration the following term. But one of the other things is satisfactory academic progress. So by general nature, for federal aid, you have to maintain this 2.0 GPA at minimum. And there's also the 67% completion rate. So you have to pass 67% of the classes that you take, or else you're liable to not be eligible for federal aid without doing an appeal process. And so let's just say you have a first-gen student who has dropped all of their classes in that first term and then has kind of the same thing in the spring. Depending on when the school actually does their SAT review process will dictate whether or not that student is going to be able to continue with as business as usual, with being able to go into the next term and still have aid, or they'll have to go through the SAP appeal, which you then have to kind of express what occurred during that term, what caused you to not perform, what has changed, and how would you be able to sustain that excellence to get you there. And usually there's always involvement. This is kind of one of those avenues where financial aid and academic advisement are kind of hand in hand, because more than 9 times out of 10, the academic advisor is creating kind of the SAT plan to say, all right, this is what needs to occur for us to get you back in within good standing. And those are some things that not meeting SAP could then just derail you from being able to complete your degree. And that ties into academic probation. Usually this is the warning term before you are liable to lose your aid. So let's say you do go for the fall term and you end it with nothing but W grades, which means you withdrew from them all. You now could be on academic probation that following term, which is to let you know, hey, there's a problem. And if you do not meet these standards, you are liable to lose aid going forward. Unusual enrollment is something that I would say is not as new now that a few years have been gone. But it is something that we've seen a lot of in the financial aid community, especially with the growth of online programs and students kind of trying to figure out which program they're best suited for. When you enroll in 2 or 3 more institutions within, I believe it's a 4 academic year span, you are getting flagged for what they call unusual enrollment by the Department of Education, which requires us to kind of take a deeper look at your prior experience at other institutions to see if you might be someone that we need to understand, like, what's going on here. I like it because it enforces the conversation. So where a student might not have been having these conversations at previous institutions, your institution now has the ability to step in and kind of give them the information to kind of correct their behavior and let them know that there's consequences for, these changes and hopping from school to school at times. So it's one of those things that is not as common with the first gen students entering, but if you have a first gen student who might have came to school and then stopped, these are some of the type of things they can experience when they come back and they're looking for the right fit. So it's just something that I want people to think of, especially if you're a school where you have a large online program and have rolling admission for some of those programs. And the last thing is change in circumstances. Not something that I think gets enough love, but as financial aid administrators, we are able to look at different financial scenarios for you and your family. So naturally, with the FAFSA NCSS profile at this point being back, not necessarily reflecting your current financial status and usually going from a prior year, there are ways to kind of appeal your aid award to say, hey, like, this award doesn't really reflect the type of financial situation my family has found in. So whether you had a family member lose a job, or there was a dramatic change in income or something occurred, like, there are ways to figure out if there's additional finances that can be given or your award can be reconsidered in some cases. So we should be educating students on the ability to change things if something happens. So like having the language in relation to, we offer this opportunity, if something changes, please submit documentation, and we can review your award to see if there's any additional funds we might be able to provide you. And for personal hurdles, filling out a place can happen. Naturally, first gen student, especially if you're going to university and living on campus and not in your home state, you can always fill out a place, especially depending on the community in which you're coming from and now the community in which you exist. And that goes hand in hand with lacking community. I tend to always sympathize with this because as a student, as a minority student in particular, I had the luxury of being able to be within communities that I didn't feel like I felt okay with because I seen more representation of me. But if you end up being at an institution where there may not be a lot of members like you in your classrooms or stuff, there's sometimes where you can fill out a place. So I always like to say, make sure that the students are aware of like the student groups that exist within your campus, because that could be the difference between them feeling homesick and filling out a place, to be able to just find a community to embed themselves in and feel good about where they at. And then degree change of heart, it's one of those things where you knowing that there's a cap as far as the amount of aid you can receive, specifically the Pell Grant, those changes for a degree program impacts your completion percentage. So the biggest thing that I always say is like, it's okay to know that you don't necessarily have the answers for I don't know what degree I want, but if you are making up your mind to figure out like, oh, I want to do this, consider the change in degree. So like if you're in one program where there's just no, like the classes, for example, I want to say, let's say graphic design, for example, and then you want to then say, you know what, I want to be a human service major. There's a good chance that none of those classes are going to transfer towards that degree program. So depending on how long you were doing that one particular program, you could have already impacted your ability to have financial aid throughout that full process. So particularly for the federal aid, institutions have their own rules on how many terms they might give a student financial aid, and particularly the institutional assistance. So that varies. And so I think it's very important to make sure that the information regarding changing the degree and how that can impact your long-term financial aid is very important to have. So therefore students are aware that like, yeah, you don't have an X amount of years to just figure out what you want to do for your degree program. Natalie, anything you want to add on this one?
No. Okay, so this brings us to who do students seek out for advice? So a lot of times when students are struggling financially, they will not reach out to anyone. So in this presentation, we'll talk about how can you kind of create a more welcoming atmosphere within your office to get students to speak up and talk to you so that they don't get stopped by any of those hurdles. But as you can see, the second runner-up is financial aid advisors. So many people listening probably know that students do come to you when they are struggling financially. So how can we support the journey as financial aid administrators? I kind of broke this up into 3 sections on how you can assist with some of those hurdles that Jerome had just mentioned. And the number one to me is communications. The first being reviewing your financial aid offer letter. There are a lot of regulation changes coming, so it should make a lot of universities create their financial aid letters that are more understandable, don't use as many acronyms like Jerome had said, and make sure it's really giving them the information that they need. So a couple years ago, my institution did a deep dive, and the way we kind of revised our letter was we wrote down all the questions we got during incoming freshmen and asked them what were our most frequently asked questions regarding our offer letter. And we noticed that a lot of the stuff they were asking, we could have answered if it was clearer in the letter. The number one thing I would say is define your cost of attendance within the letter, really break out what are direct charges for the university versus indirect, give them, if you have room on the letter, resources on where they can learn more, because obviously you can't fit all in a 1 to 2 page offer letter. The other thing to really break down is the difference between gift aid, self-help aid, and federal work study, so that they know the difference. I think federal work study, if you can provide a clear definition, is always helpful, because a lot of families think that they're going to get $2,000, $3,000 off the bill, and that's not how that program works. So defining it already in your offer letter will save you some questions probably from families, but also, give them more guidance right from the start. And then the other thing that I think is coming more common is people want to know what the bottom line is to go to your university. So making sure that bottom line is clearly stated. At my university, we do break it up between just putting what it would be if you just use gift aid, so no self-help aid. And then we break it up in another section where we say, if you do want to use federal student loans and self-help aid, this is what your total cost will be. This is really great, especially for first generation students, because like we said, everything is so new to them and their families. They don't have things to reference. Like when your parents are in college, they can't go and ask that, like, what was your merit scholarship, or what does a grant mean? So trying to define those terms already in the offer letter will help the family and the student. In terms of SAP, this is another communication that I recommend offices look at. I actually got this tip from another colleague. She said, make your SAP letter less intimidating, so students want to come and discuss with you their satisfactory academic progress. So what I mean by this is use helping language. Don't start off with, you are going to lose federal aid because you are below the GPA. Why don't you start off with, we know life can be tough. Sometimes transitioning to college can be difficult. And we see that, academically you may have struggled, but these are the resources you can use to improve that. And then obviously a lot of federal language does need to be thrown in there, but start with a soft opening so that students aren't intimidated to ask for help when they're at that point of SAP, so that they can continue their academic journey and hopefully improve and be successful and make it to the end. Again, when you're sending reminders to your students, make them friendly and engaging. For instance, like FAFSAs. When you want a student to complete a FAFSA, be clever, be fun with it. Recently for St. Patrick's Day, we did a FAFSA reminder where it's like, don't miss out on your pot of gold. I try to think when you're making communications, the generation that you're speaking to as well. So a lot of these students are very quick visuals that will give them not a lot of information, and something that's eye-catching and aesthetically pleasing is what my students tell me. So go in and look at some of, the more simple messaging that you can do that doesn't need to be so word heavy, and get the message across clearly by going in and making those reminders friendly and engaging. And even, like I said, with SAB, you obviously can't put a clever picture with it, but just make sure you're being nice in the way you're speaking to the student. And then the other thing to help support the process is use similar language between offices. At my university, financial aid and the business office is separate, but we're working with the same student and trying to help them successfully pay down a balance or things of that sort. So we try to make sure that we always have common messaging and common language being used between, because if we're saying, a certain word this way and the business office is saying it another way, the student is already confused, already so stressed. So just making sure that both offices are on the same page when making a plan for the student and what they're saying to them. And then if you can, try to be a part of that withdrawal process, because like Jerome said, a lot of students don't realize that there are caps on how much loan money you can borrow for a program, how much Pell Grant you can receive. Also, they're not familiar where if they do just drop, that some of their aid may need to be returned to the federal government, and that is going to leave them with a balance if there isn't a way for them to cover that. It's not always going to happen, but try to encourage people, campus partners that do work with the withdrawn process of a student, to make your office involved in it so that you can tell them the ramifications in person if possible. It's not always, but if you can always get a student who's thinking of withdrawing to come speak to you prior, maybe than making that decision, it could change their mind, or at least they won't be so shell-shocked when they're like, wait, I have a $7,000 balance I'm left with. So being a part of that process could be really helpful. The other thing that I would recommend is having events and presentations for your campus. This year, if you're able to host a FAFSA workshop day for your returning students. Sometimes, freshmen may have that support from, college planning centers or high school guidance counselors, but then once they're in college, they are like, who can I go to for help? So make it known that they can go to the financial aid office to get help. And sometimes if you just put it in one day, kind of leave it open-ended, it will make students maybe, just pop in and stop by. We did this at my campus. It worked out really well. Students came in throughout the day asking simple questions, some a little bit more intense, but it was a way to engage our students in coming to our office and not feeling intimidated, as well as them getting their FAFSAs done so that they can be successful next year. And then to present to current students helpful financial aid reminders. So at any time, if you can get in front of your campus at an event to tell them about new financial aid policies or updates, I always encourage staff to do that, work with students, as well as inform, other campus-facing offices, some of the changes that may be happening. And then lastly, make sure that your website is very easy to navigate. Obviously, you can't change your entire institution website, but focus on your financial aid page and make sure you're using clear and concise language. So like Jerome said, look through your website and make sure if there is an acronym there that is also saying what that acronym means. FAQs, a lot of people think are outdated, but I think in our industry, an FAQ page is very helpful because people do have the same questions over again. And if you can always guide them to somewhere where they can go to find that information, that's extremely helpful. And then, like I said, always provide definitions to any of those financial aid terms you may be using. And make sure your website is very transparent, because transparency, I think, in financial aid is crucial.
And Natalie, someone has a good question. So does your financial aid office have multiple computers for students to do the FAFSA on a day like that? Or do you encourage them to bring their own laptops?
So when we did it, I requested through our IT department, a laptop cart, but I will say most of the students actually did bring in their own personal computers. And one thing I will say is when you're advertising it, to make sure to tell them to bring their FSA ID, username, and password, because a lot of students would get there and they're like, I don't know my login. So that was something we learned to improve for next year.
Thank you.
So kind of sticking to how to support the journey. One of the things I always like to point out is the student handbook. I feel like as institutions, we tend to use this as the holy grail. And sometimes this can fail. The only, as we've seen now, students' attention spans have kind of really decreased, so much so that like it's involved in the way marketing is done. It's like videos are more need to be short form instead of these long form videos, just because you worry about keeping the engagement of students. And so naturally, when you have such a giant handbook, which goes through pretty much everything a student needs to have, as far as rights and responsibilities as a student, some things can probably get lost because you throw in the fact that they're also reading textbooks and reading discussion boards and their courses. There's a lot of reading that is going on. So there could always be the realm where something can get missed. So I always say it's a great resource for students to learn about the school and their obligations, but the info, does it always reach the students the way you need it to? So I always like to say, give things in digestible doses. So therefore you can ensure that it's ensuring that the materials digest for the students. And so some of the things that I like to talk about is notifying students early of potential implications of their aid and enrollment status. So one of the worst things I feel like a student is for them to know what their actions has caused as opposed to what it can cause. So kind of being in retreat mode where they've already kind of done what has caused the failure on their part and not really knowing how to navigate that until they're in a crisis, which can just make it more stressful for a student. Adjusting your award letters to include information on SAP and merit award requirements, which I think Ali also highlighted earlier, which is very important. Students need to understand what requirements are there for their awards and how they can actually ensure that they keep those. So award letters can be complicated, and each institution has their own way of sending that out. I say always keep it simple. Showing them their breakdown of cost of attendance in comparison to their aid award is the perfect formula. So therefore they can actually know what their expected costs are and how they can actually earn. So Natalie brought up the work study in particular. People can tend to think, oh, okay, I know I have $2,000 in work study, then I know it can cause that. Not knowing that, yeah, you have to get a job to actually earn those funds, and so you actually have to utilize that money and sometimes pay it towards your bill. There are ways where you can have it direct go to your bill, depending on the institution and the way they handle it, but that's just some things that they should be aware of. So having some of that language on the award letters related to the funds, I think is really important because it starts the students off on the right foot. And one of my huge things is maintaining a great relationship between your financial aid staff, the admission staff, academic advisement, registrar, and student accounts. I like to say these 5 officers have the biggest impact on student success at the university and degree completion. They're all intertwined in some way. So admissions being able to send out an acceptance with a financial aid offer so the students can make the affordable decision for themselves. Financial aid, making sure documents for certain funds are in so disbursements can occur in a timely manner. So ensure student accounts can process student refunds as well as prevent any holds. Academic advisement, ensuring students know what courses they need to take to complete their program that they need to take. So, but also helping students figure out ways to get back on track if they're in danger of losing their eligibility. And registrar, ensuring student enrollment statuses get reported to the clearinghouse, which has an impact on students going into repayment. So it's very important that those officers kind of have a good communication, because at some point in time, there could be a situation where your officers will have to interact to serve the student for the better good. So I say, if you don't have a strong relationship with one of these officers now, that should be something that you do have the framework on, because if those 5 officers are running in unison and it's all on the same page, the students is 9 times out of 10 going to be set up for success. And the biggest thing is each office might have competing deadlines, but does each office know what their deadline is for those offices, right? So having that communication can cut out a lot of some of that stuff that can go on and fall through the cracks. Because the last thing you want to do is kind of shuffle students from office to office, and that can be frustrating to a student, and it can cause them to say, I give up. Like, I don't feel like anyone wants to help me, and I'm just done with it. So you want to try to avoid shuffling students, or at least making kind of that handoff while holding their hand. So like, I brought you to the place, I'm gonna tell you how they're going to help you. and then leading off, which I think is always the best course of action. And then my last point here on leave of absence discussions and how that impacts their aid and prospective future. Leave of absences in itself for the financial aid administrators is here. I know that that's not necessarily a process that we love, but we know that we need to support the students the best way and give them the tools to be successful and understand, take their mental health and physical health within consideration to ensure that they are okay. But we also want to make sure that they're educated on the process and returning back to campus, as well as what can potentially happen when they leave. So therefore they can make sure that they have that in tow as well. Oh, you're on mute, Natalie.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so like Jerome had mentioned, a lot of times, sometimes first generation students run into getting overwhelmed with the college transition in many ways. So a common thing that universities may face is a student may come into their office or come into some office and say, I need to drop a course, without knowing the ramifications of what could come if they drop below half time, if it's going to delay them now in graduating on time. There's lots of things that can come with this. So this is kind of a 3-tiered system I made for how you can kind of support a student through those struggles that they may be facing. And the first is to always start and just listen to the student. Sometimes students will come in and just start rambling, and I say, let them ramble. They're stressed, they're overwhelmed, and then try to pick up those Easter eggs they're dropping and try to think of ways that then you can move on to supporting them. So then you want to show them support. You want to show the student that you're there for them. You want to offer them resources to help continue their success at the university. And like Jerome said, you want to connect the student directly with those resources. I know a lot of times our jobs can be very overwhelming and very busy, but I always try to remind everyone that, we're here for the students. So how can we best serve them? And some of these students are going to take a little bit more time and effort in order to get them to the finish line, but that's what we want to see for all our students. And then help them make a realistic plan on achieving those goals. So if they come in saying, I need to drop a course, and you think there maybe could be time where they don't need to necessarily drop this, but how can we improve it so that they can successfully pass the course? And if they can't, then let's make a realistic plan on how you can make up those credits, or how can you not have this happen. Work with those other offices, be resourceful, be kind of imaginative in the plans. I actually taught this year, and I did have a student in this situation, and we worked it out with the registrar where she was able to pick up workshops for dropping the course, and that kept her on track. So, like I said, reach out to other offices, because you never know what kind of creative ways there might be there to keep the student successfully in their academic course of plan. And then lastly, motivate them. Always follow up with the student with a positive message. I think there's a lot of negativity in this world. So giving that student that encouragement that they may need may make all the difference in their day and all the difference in their success plan. Also maximize your time with your students and be productive and goal-oriented in the meetings. Like I said, we're busy. So when you're meeting with a student, make sure that, you're setting plans for them as well as for yourself so that you can be productive moving forward. And then just encourage and celebrate students when they achieve their goals. I have so many students that I work with, when I see that they, successfully got off the SAP, I'll send them that email saying, your hard work is paying off. You're doing great. Congratulations. If you ever need anything, I'm here to support. And I think having those words of encouragement, again, will make students be more open to coming to your office when they're in times of need, but also spread the message to their fellow classmates, knowing that you are a safe space in your office and you are truly there to help the student.
Well said, Natalie.
Thank you. Okay. So to kind of continue on that point, so creating an inclusive financial aid advising practice. So how do you do that? You want to provide strategies and tools for not only the students, but your staff members as well. So create material that can assist students when you're not around, because that's true. You're not going to be there 24/7. So have resources that these students can take with them, or you can email them. And help them build a team of support. The financial aid office can only do so much. So that's why, like Jerome said, have close relationships with admissions, student accounts, and the registrar, because they're part of that student success team. You want to keep the student on track. You also want to keep track of what strategies and resources you're giving to students are working. That's really important. We reevaluate all our communications, all our processes once a year in the summer to see what's working with, our student population and what's not anymore. Generations change, and the way students process information or the type of help or resources they need is going to change from a year-to-year basis. So have those check-ins. And then remember that each student is unique and that every student may need a different toolbox. You can't have standard plans for the entire population. Every student is going to be a little different, so adapt those plans so that they can be successful for that specific student. And then accountability. Show students that you are genuinely there for their needs. This is really important too when working with the first generation population, because you don't know how much support they have at home. So you may need to be that support system for them to be successful in the journey. So again, like I said, you want to follow up and always check in. You want to assist them in thinking through their steps. You want to provide them information which is needed for them to achieve their goals. That's really important. Like if you're going to help set up goals for them, make sure you're giving them the tools to reach those goals. And then also articulate the expectations and responsibilities of all parties. Set realistic expectations on your end. There are many cases. I work at a small private institution where, if they have a $7,000 balance, I can say, this is what we can do for you. And this is what you're going to have to do for yourself. And hopefully we can work something out. But I think it's so important to be realistic in the plans you're setting for your students.
I just want to also add here is that, being in the financial aid world where you're depending on your office size, the requirements and the things that you may have to do could seem large. So I always say to try to make sure that, your framework is set. So therefore the people who sit in these offices don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, or you can ensure that everything is still being handled in the same way. So making sure that the framework for being able to assist these students kind of exists. So whether that's the information laying in your award letters, like it's set up in an automated process where that each time that you're going to send out award letters, for example, that information will always be consistent year to year to help support these students, because you might not have the capacity to do some of the legwork that might also, be required to ensure these students' success. And one of the other things is, do you have the ability to actually identify who your first gen population? Do you give a platform for these students to say, I'm first gen, right? Like, because otherwise you don't really have a way of knowing. And then you're kind of just doing this general award practice and feeling like, well, hopefully everyone takes it the same. So do you even have an ability to identify who your first gen population is? Because maybe you want to drive more content towards them, knowing that they might not be armed with the information that's a necessity, especially if you're coming in new to the office and you feel like there's a framework that you're not 100% sure of. If you know that you have ways of targeting your students and identifying who that population is, you can be better served to make sure that they're getting the materials that they deserve to have. And if you make it make sense, first gen can survive and thrive. It all comes back, summing up everything, keeping award letters consistent, making sure the information that is required for some of the things we talked about, making sure that's outlined clear for students. So therefore that they know what they need to do. They know what type of pitfall they can have and how they can navigate around that in particular. You never want students to feel defeated or feel like they don't have the ability to kind of bounce back from any, unfortunate turns that happen, because life comes at you fast and you can have a plan, but there are a lot of things that can knock you off your path. So you want to be able to make sure that they have the information available to them, so therefore they know how to navigate these avenues, because this is their first time going through it. And you want to make sure that they're prepared to deal with everything that comes with being a college student.
Oh, thank you so much. And we can go through this as well. And there is one other question. So I think, Natalie, you mentioned it a little bit. Maybe you can share it again or go 2 sentences further. The question is, can you share an example of a soft opening SAP satisfactory academic progress letter that you sent out.
Yeah, so I'll just use the first line in ours, which is, we understand that you may face challenges throughout your time here at Salve Regina. It's just adding a simple sentence like that, I think, makes all the difference, and starting with, we understand, knowing that you have understanding for the student, and I think that word carries compassion in its tone, can really help them, continue reading the letter is really also the other important. And then, like I said, having a very strong and positive ending. So we end our letter saying, we strongly encourage you to use all your resources available to you that at the university to help improve your academic performance. So again, setting them up, leaving them with encouraging and supportive words, but also giving them an actionable item, like go use those academic resources on campus because they can help you improve.
Thank you.
So a little bit about resources before campus. As I mentioned, I know that as a financial aid administrator, depending on what time of year or what your office looks like at the time, you might not have the ability to have kind of some of these deeper discussions to ensure students. So I would like to always provide people with a list of resources that they can always provide the students for them to kind of get some education on their own and deal with organizations who are focused on that. So Center for First Gen under NASPA.org. This center is fairly new. It's a premier source of evidence-based practices, professional development, and knowledge creation for the higher education community to advance the success of first-generation students. And we've already seen some universities kind of utilize some of the information that they have provided to be able to create more structured processes for their first-generation students. Some cases, or universities developing centers for first-gen support as a good example. You Aspire is a nonprofit organization ensuring that all young people have the financial information and resources necessary to find an affordable path to and through college. Their singular focus is on college affordability and removing financial barriers so that every student has an equitable opportunity to attain post-secondary degree without burdensome debt. You Aspire, they help a lot of students complete FAFSAs. During my time at Northeastern, working with the foundation year program, where I've seen a lot of first-gen students, a lot of them were coming from You Aspire from getting FAFSA help. And so they're a really good organization as far as helping students figure out FAFSA information, as well as they don't, from the last time I checked, they're not necessarily the experts on CSS profile, but they do offer support in helping kind of navigate those hurdles as well. Gear Up, it stands for Gaining Early Awareness and Readiness for Undergraduate Programs. It's a national initiative to encourage more young people to have high expectations, stay in school, study hard, and take the right courses to go to college. Gear Up Massachusetts serves low-income priority students in 5 cohorts across 7 of the Commonwealth most impoverished areas. And the last one that I want to highlight here is, Commonwealth most impoverished areas: Boston, Holyoke, Lawrence, Lowell, New Bedford, Springfield, Worcester. Target middle and high schools have poverty rates as high as 93%, and most of the largest are categorized as persistently lowest achieving with the state improvement grant schools. And then here is a shameless plug. From our work with MASPA, we had started a first-gen student support mentor program, which we like to call ourselves change agents, where we have the ability to work with students throughout the process of going through the aid process, being able to be that resource to them that we always wanted to make sure that they have at a university level, but giving our time to make students are armed with the information they need to know to be able to navigate that college process. And so if you are involved in MASPA or want to be a part of MASPA, this is a perfect program if you want to be more in tune with first-gen students and being able to support them. So we always welcome people to become change agents. And that is the end of our presentation.
So Jerron and Natalie, thank you so much. And thank you to the whole group. We're receiving a lot of positive comments that everyone loved all the information and they're looking forward to receiving the recording and the slides. So this was a great conversation and so much detailed, good information. So I can't thank you enough. And thank you to everyone who's participating in the audience as well. And I will just end by saying, please stay in touch. And if you think that others might like to watch this presentation, just let them know that this will live in the MEFA Institute, so people can watch it at a later date. And if you're a school counselor, you can also receive professional development points for the lessons in the Institute as well. And with that, I will say, everyone have a great afternoon, great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.